So, I just finished Bridgerton Season 3, and it was kind of a letdown, so much so that I've decided I'm gonna make a video about it. If you don't know, Bridgerton is a Netflix show based on a historical romance book series of the same name by Julia Quinn. It is set in a heightened, somewhat fictionalized version of early 1800s Regency Britain and centers around a fictional rich and noble family called the Bridgertons. It has been very well received on Netflix, in part due to it being the first mainstream show of its kind that is set in Regency era England that actually has people of colour in main roles, and large families of lots of different heritages are represented in the world of the show. It also has a lot of smut and sex scenes, and the first season in particular became a sort of guilty pleasure for viewers who wanted to watch a sexy show that catered towards the female gaze rather than male ideals of what is deemed sexy. It's become Netflix's biggest ever English language show, and it's proven to producers that there is scope for great commercial success with shows created for female audiences, and sure, men like it too, but the romance genre in general is largely written by and for women, and Bridgerton certainly falls into that genre. Each season so far has had what I would call a raw dogging episode, which is an entire episode dedicated to the couple of the season having a sex rampage after their slow burn romance, so that's the kind of show we're dealing with. Now, there are 8 Bridgerton siblings, and each sibling has a book and therefore has a season of the Netflix show, but they're not necessarily going in order. The first season of the show was Daphne, who had a slow burn, fake dating to real dating romance with Simon the Duke. Then we have the eldest boy, Anthony Bridgerton.
I'm the eldest boy!
Who had another slow burn enemies to lovers with Kate. The first 2 seasons followed a similar structure. There was one central love plot where the man was battling some trauma about his father, which prevented him from being able to love properly. He then overcomes this, there's a love declaration, there's loads of sex, and there's a happy ending for all, with subplots for the other siblings and recurring characters in between. The whole town receives and circulates a pamphlet/gossip column called Lady Whistledown, which spreads gossip about all the nobility in the town, and everyone reads it, so much so that it disrupts royal events just because it's been published. Nobody knows who the real Lady Whistledown is until the end of season 1, where we as the audience find out that it's Penelope Featherington. Now, Penelope has always had a crush on Colin Bridgerton, the third eldest Bridgerton sibling, and season 3 is officially Colin's season. Based on book 4, titled Romancing Mr. Bridgerton, the pair have been friends since childhood, and this season is their friends to lovers journey. Now, it's worth noting that Bridgerton's showrunner Chris Van Dusen has stepped down for season 3 and left the show to be replaced by Jess Brownell. And whilst a change in showrunner is always going to be noticeable as it's someone else's vision for the show now, this season has not just felt weird tonally. It feels like a whole different show, and it's lost a lot of what drew people into the first 2 seasons. And I don't think it's purely because of a change in showrunner. I think that there are a lot of factors that are making this true for a lot of people, and one glaring one is the characterization of Colin Bridgerton. Now, before we get deep into the world of Bridgerton, I want to take a quick moment to thank today's sponsor, Aura. I really love when I get to promote something that I genuinely think is an amazing deal and could actually make you safer online. And Aura is doing just that. I'm a huge believer in cybersecurity. Even if you are an average Joe without a high-power need for protection online, the amount of companies that you have unknowingly given huge amounts of your personal data to just by being online is staggering. You know how in Bridgerton they're all scared of Lady Whistledown getting wind of their gossip, and that's like a huge deal because everyone will know their business? Well, imagine that times 1,000, because in 2024, companies literally do know all of your business, and they are selling that to other companies so that they can target you using what they know. By downloading Aura, you get protection from people using your data to commit identity theft, financial fraud, and selling your personal information to companies. If you use the internet for things like online shopping, banking, consultations, it's likely that your full name, email, home address, health records, and relatives' information is all out there, ready to be stolen or sold, which is terrifying. So Aura tells me which data brokers are selling my information and automatically submit opt-out requests for me, meaning I can clean up my data online without lifting a finger. If, like me, you want to stop data brokers from accessing your personal information, you can download a 14-day free trial of Aura at aura.com/uncleherman, where you can get full access to all of their online safety tools and try them for yourself. So be sure to click the link in the description, and thank you again to Aura for sponsoring this video. So before I air my grievances with this season of Bridgerton, let me first say what I did enjoy. Number 1, Benedict is back in business. Okay, so the first part of this season, I was super disappointed that they had erased Benedict's sexual identity. In season 1, he was the bisexual art brother, the gay cousin, the man with the flair. He was exploring his queerness with his art friend from Downton Abbey. He clearly was questioning his sexuality when he found out his friend was gay, but then this all fell to the sidelines in season 2 and the first part of season 3. I was so annoyed that they had teased that he might be queer and then pretended it never happened. I felt gaslit, I felt queerbaited. But then part 2 drops and suddenly we have a queer storyline with Benedict where it's explicitly talked about and he admits that he likes men. And I was overjoyed to see this. I thought we were getting bi erasure and then suddenly we're getting bi live in living colour. I did find it strange though that he said he'd never really considered it before.
He thought perhaps the two of you shared a moment?
I have known men like Mr. Suarez, but I myself have never felt tempted before.
Because if so, what is this scene from season 1 trying to tell us?
It takes courage to live outside the traditional expectations of society. You talk of doing the same, but perhaps it is merely just that. All talk.
That is bi curiosity. He has considered this before canonically. But whatever, he's considering it now, and we finally have a queer Bridgerton sibling with his very own gay angst, cheeky music to accompany him wherever he goes. And yes, it's a stereotype for the bisexual character to be engaging in threesomes, and yes, the only way that they show that he likes different genders is by having him literally having sex with more than one gender at the same time, leading into this sexually promiscuous stereotype of bisexuality. And yes, it also reduces his character and identity to just his sexual experiences rather than a nuanced exploration of his identity outside of sex. But listen, I'm not saying it's perfect representation, especially as the threesome is used as a device for jealousy, but at least it's something. My only worry now, though, is that he will be erased once again in his season and have his sexuality come across as his promiscuous phase before he was ready to settle down rather than a core part of him. But time will tell. 2, the Queens and Cressida's peacocking. If you don't know what peacocking is, it's the not-so-subtle art of dressing for attention. You know, the way that male peacocks display their feathers to try and seduce the female peacocks.
Are you peacocking? Really?
And Cressida and the Queen are perfect peacocks this season. I've seen a lot of people saying that the costuming and the hair has become a bit too modern and a bit too wild. And honestly, I kind of disagree because this is not a historical show in my opinion. It's a fantasy world where the Queen wears wigs with entire dioramas in them. She constantly looks like an ice cream, and I love it. I also love Cressida's huge shoulder accessories and coats that she's always wearing. It has an absurdist feel to it, which personally really works for me because this is an absurd version of history. It's reminiscent of the sort of world of Poor Things. Cressida's hair and costuming always makes her look like a big bird on the prowl, and I like how outlandish she always looks. She's always trying to pull attention towards herself, whether that be through looks or proclaiming that she is Whistledown. She tries so hard to be noticed, and yet the men that she wants to notice her never do. I think she's a really interesting character that could go further, especially if she was realised by the creatives as the hot, mean lesbian that I think she is. But unfortunately, you're only queer in this world if you are having a threesome right now. 3, Francesca's storyline. The third part of the series that I like is Francesca and her story. I think that this love story, in comparison to the others this season, has a really good pace, and there's something really genuine there. We haven't really gotten to know Francesca in the past 2 seasons, and now we have a new actor stepping into the role, and I really like what she's done with it. I also like that she is introverted and autism coded. I know a lot of autistic women are able to relate very strongly to her, and it's nice to see that she's able to find someone who she connects with in her own way, and is not being forced to change herself to fit in with her siblings. They've got their own little version of Regency love on the spectrum going on, and as a person on the spectrum myself, I love to see it. But I am sensing a little twist right at the end there when she is introduced to her brand new husband's lady cousin. Like, am I crazy or do I spy another bisexual Bridgerton? We love to see it, but please, please don't have a cousin threesome. 4, Penelope stabbing herself in the back. I think that Penelope has always been an interesting character because, if we're being honest, she kind of destroys the lives of women in her society on purpose for profit. She writes about the men too, but in both the viewer's world and the world of the show, we know that men can get away with anything, and the repercussions are rarely severe and often short-lived for them. It's always the women that suffer the most backlash and rejection from their peers in this world. Penelope is very bitter that the people around her don't pay much attention to her. She's rejected and bullied by her mother and sisters, and has had no real luck fighting finding a husband, and her mother is pretty confident that she will be the spinster of the family who stays home with her as she ages. So it seems like writing Lady Whistledown and having a secret that she can use against people is her way of getting back at the society that rejects her. These people have ruined her life, so now she will profit off of ruining theirs. And so I really like the fact that Penelope had to finally write some truly damning gossip about herself as Lady Whistledown. It got to the point where if she didn't mention the gossip, which was the fact that Colin was giving her lessons on how to seduce a man, which we will get into later, it would have been obvious that she was Lady Whistledown. So it felt like a long time coming that she would have had to do this to herself and actually suffer the consequences of being written about in her own column and get to face the societal backlash that so many others, including her ex-best friend Eloise Bridgerton, have had to face because of her. And I enjoyed her finally realizing the power that she has and regretting doing so much damage before. It actually shows a sort of development and acknowledges that the way that she has used her power has been for bad rather than for good. Okay, so that's what I liked about the season. Now, let's get into the parts that didn't quite add up for me. I think the main thing that has made this season seem off is the quality of the time that we've spent on screen with Colin and Penelope. In the world of Bridgerton, Penelope's always been an outcast. She loves reading and writing, spending time alone, and she's in love with her childhood best friend Colin, who's always seen her as another of his little sisters. Nobody in this world seems to believe in Penelope or her ability to be the subject of anyone's affection. But we as an audience don't believe this. We as an audience are supposed to be rooting for her, and I think the first issue that I want to talk about is I don't think it comes across like the writers of this show believe in Penelope as a love interest in her own right. In the past 2 seasons, she's been a side character with a very interesting storyline, so you would think that now that it's her season, we'd get more of her, but it feels like she's still a side character in her own season. The main reason for this is that the season is unfocused, with too many subplots going on and none of them connecting in any way. It feels like my focus is being pulled in so many different directions that the main plot is lost. For example, the Mondrick family have newly inherited wealth and they're trying to fit into society as people who have never had to do this sort of thing before. Is that interesting? Yes. But do I care about it in this season? No, because I don't know enough about these people to warrant them having an entire subplot. And this plot does not serve the main story in any way, so to keep going back and forth feels like I'm channel hopping between 2 different Regency era shows. Like, why should I care about this club closing down? That was a chapter that ended long ago, and they interact with the main storyline, but they don't affect them in any way, apart from hosting a ball, but that ball could have been anywhere, so I really don't see how this storyline is serving the plot of the show. It's the same with Lady Danbury and her brother's backstory. It felt super random, and if it had been taken out of the show, it would have had no effect whatsoever. I'm interested in knowing more about Lady Danbury, and I want her to have something to do this season, but bringing her brother in and having some sort of backstory was just really random, especially as I've been told that in the book she is very close with Penelope and is sort of like a mentor figure to her. It would have been really nice to actually see that and to have seen Lady Danbury and Penelope develop their friendship, rather than just having a random brother introduced as a way to get the Bridgerton mother to have a love interest. It was too contrived and pointless and felt like it was setting something up, but there was no payoff. Another minor character that is getting a lot of screen time is Cressida Cowper, who is a very interesting character, and I like that she was competing with Penelope for Lord Debling, but because the Lord Debling storyline was so short-lived, it felt kind of pointless. Like, he was just there for a few episodes and then we completely forgot about him. I think that Cressida could have been a much more fleshed out character with more to do if she had also been going for Colin. If Cressida and Penelope had both been competing for Colin's affections rather than this random lord that we'd never seen before, it could have added a lot more intrigue to both of their plots, and also Eloise's plot, as she has to decide where her loyalties lie and who's actually best for her brother. For alas, Cressida gets a bit of backstory with her parents, a small friendship with Eloise, and then pretends to be Lady Whistledown in a plot that we know will fail. Mostly she's just there seemingly as a substitute person for Eloise to be in scenes with, since she had her friendship breakup with Penelope at the end of season 2. Then, once Eloise becomes friends with Penelope again, there's no longer a need for Cressida, and I think that's just a shame and a disservice to the character. So with the focus not really on the main storyline, or any storyline for that matter, the characterization of Penelope and Colin has suffered, because we don't really get to see their chemistry blossoming on screen from friends to lovers. I love a good friends to lovers storyline, and I would have liked to have seen the Penelope and Colin that we knew from the first 2 seasons have this season together, but all that we saw built up between them before seems to have been left behind, and the characters have been changed to try and live up to the romantic leads of the previous seasons instead of letting them be themselves. This season, Colin comes in with a new personality gained from being abroad. Though at the start of season 2 he also went abroad and came back essentially the same, so what was it about this trip that made it all different? We'll never know because they don't tell us. So he comes back and all of a sudden he's a heartthrob. His sweet sort of soy boy energy is gone and replaced with an attempt at this hypermasculine ideal that both the male leads before him had, but it falls short as if they were working overtime to make him a heartthrob for viewers at home when he didn't actually need to change himself to do that. Traditional masculinity and sex appeal don't have to go hand in hand. what made him an interesting character in the previous seasons was his gentleness. His love for Marina in season 1 shows us this, as him and Marina are in a room together and she goes to kiss him and he refuses, saying that he wants to protect her honor, whereas his elder brothers would have likely kissed her anyway.
I can hardly believe I'm saying this, but we cannot go further. You are a lady, and I must maintain your honor and mine, no matter how tempting otherwise.
But now that he has become a lead, the choice has been to try and give him traditional sex appeal by making him have threesomes, be more promiscuous. But for me, it just felt forced. We don't need to see a man having sex in order to have him have sex appeal for viewers. I mean, look at Mr. Darcy. He's a hero of the soft, awkward man genre that shows that the female gaze doesn't need this, especially when it betrays the character. I understand that he's supposedly trying to fit in with his friends by sleeping around and sleeping with prostitutes so that we can see his change in character as he starts to catch feelings for Penelope. But this would have made sense for Anthony or Simon, not for Colin. Simon and Anthony were both fuckboys, or rakes as they called them in the day. We saw it a little bit, but ultimately we knew that they slept around because it was part of their character. But with Colin, it feels like they couldn't convince us that he was a rake without showing it. You don't have to sell me on a male lead by making him hypermasculine. We were already sold on Colin, and it's disappointing that they went in this direction and undermined the character that they built up in the previous seasons. And this is the core reason behind him giving me the ick. Alright, so I've seen a lot of people defending Colin, saying that the character's supposed to be icky and supposed to be cringe because he's putting on a persona to fit in with his friends. But I'm not sure I agree with this explanation because 1, where have these friends come from and where did they go? They were in like 2 episodes. And 2, it's not true in the world of the show that he is cringe. If we saw him attempting to seduce women and failing, that would have fit. It would show that he's trying to fit in with the rake persona, but he can't quite get there. But instead we see him constantly succeeding. In the world of Bridgerton, Colin is the Riz King. Everyone in society thinks he's the catch of the season. So how am I supposed to think that this is a thin facade that hides an internal conflict about who he is and who he wants to become when none of that materializes on screen? Instead, we just see a boy walking around pouting, mewing, and TikTok looks maxing as if he owned the place. This is not the Colin that Penelope has been in love with for all these years. The things that she liked about him seem to have all vanished. So when she asks him to kiss her and he suddenly catches feelings back after about 20 years of it being entirely one-sided, it seems super rushed and lackluster. We had no anchor as to why Colin changed his heart about Penelope. There was no backstory. He just suddenly sees her as a sex opportunity after years of growing up as friends. Unlike in previous seasons, this season doesn't utilize flashback sequences to tell us about the male lead. In season 1, we saw flashbacks of Simon visiting his father on his deathbed. We saw his childhood neglect, his stutter, and the way that his father seemed to blame him for his mother's death. Through this, we learn that Simon promised his father on his deathbed that he would never marry or have an heir, and that the family lineage would die with him. So we learn why he's so reluctant towards Daphne and how his love for her conquers his fears and promises. With Anthony in season 2, we use flashbacks to establish how from a young age he's been the head of the family due to the death of his father and has had to make really hard decisions. We see him being compared to his father and having to grow up quickly, and his need for a wife comes purely from a place of helping his family and his title rather than a place of looking for love. Then, as with Simon, his love for Kate conquers all and he's able to let go and allow himself to feel love. Then there's Colin, who has had Penelope in the friend zone forever and then finally sees what he's been missing, and that's it. There's nothing really for him to overcome. If we'd seen flashbacks or a backstory of when Colin and Penelope were kids and seen how their friendship formed and what drew them together in the first place, there might have been more of a reason for them to make sense together, some way of showing that he cares for her beyond sex. There's no obstacle that he really needs to overcome in order to be with Penelope, apart from maybe stop sleeping with prostitutes and accepting that she had Lady Whistledown, but that's not really enough. I don't see Colin as a person who is really worth Penelope's time. If it takes a new dress and a simple kiss to make him see her as a woman after 20 years, honestly, I don't think he's worth it. Penelope deserves better than this version of Colin, and honestly, whenever she confessed her love for him this season, it just seemed like a self-destructive move for her. Their engagement was super rushed, just like Colin's was in season 1 with Marina, which ended up being a scheme and he didn't end up marrying Marina. So why would you make the engagement process exactly the same as the girl who was trying to trap him into marriage? And then with Colin finding out about Whistledown the night before the wedding, their wedding ends up full of bad blood between them. And I think that that was quite a good choice. I like the fact that the wedding wasn't all happy and a traditional happy ending. I mean, they played a classical rendition of Coldplay as she walks down the aisle. Nothing says this relationship is doomed like Coldplay at the wedding. For me, the wedding was super uncomfortable though, because Colin felt like a child bride. Like, I know he's not a child or a bride, but he has the energy of a child bride. I'm sorry. He just has the mind of a child who doesn't know what he's doing. I also feel like the love confession scene between them after he realizes that she's Lady Whistledown is strange for a number of reasons. The first is that I feel like whenever Penelope tells this man she loves him, she is destroying another part of herself. He's literally just an angry man-child. He hasn't matured enough or had any sort of arc that has deemed him worthy or grown up enough to earn her love. And two, Penelope says that Colin has given her confidence by basically validating her, and that's a big red flag. Colin is mad that Lady Whistledown is Penelope because Whistledown has written damning things about his family in the past. But has he actually suffered any consequences? The Bridgertons have not really suffered because of Whistledown, at least not for a while, and not sizably, and it never lasts. I was watching this season trying to rack my brain to think what she actually wrote about Colin and his family, and I actually couldn't even remember. I think the real reason he's mad, which he does state, is that he's jealous that she is a published writer and he's not, because he wants to write a book about his travels. But he's the richest boy in town. He can literally publish whatever he wants. I just can't believe he made it about him, and I feel like the Whistledown thing was dragged on for way too long. Also, when they announced the proposal at the start of part 2, everyone reacting really happily, apart from Eloise, as if it wasn't strange and rushed, was really odd. It felt like the whole of episode 5 was Penelope's imagination, and I kept thinking we were going to snap out of it, but then it turned out that was just what happened. Also, can we stop the men in this era explaining sex to women and leaving them completely in the dark about it by not saying anything and just pummeling them without telling them what's going on or what is going inside them? Stop pummeling women without telling them what a penis is first. I know it's of the time, but if you can have a wig with a diorama in it, you can have a woman know what a penis is before she consents to it going inside her, because how can you consent if you don't know what's going to happen? So lastly, I want to talk about Penelope's arc this season and the way that it entirely relies on Colin's validation. Penelope has always been her own person in previous seasons. She never had trouble speaking to men. Sure, she wasn't noticed by many of them, but when she was, or when she was talking to the publisher of Whistledown, for example, she took on a character. She demanded what she wanted. She knew how to speak for herself. So tell me why all of a sudden she can't speak to people and needs Colin's help. I get that speaking confidently to people doesn't necessarily translate to being able to flirt, but she's not even really flirting. They're making it out like she can't have a conversation, which is just not true to her character at all. The dependence on a male character to define her worth is a disappointing regression for a character who initially seemed so capable of standing on her own and knowing what she wanted. So she enlists the help of Colin to give her Riz lessons, but we don't actually see her learn anything. It's just like she's having lessons and then suddenly she knows how to talk to this guy. There's no trying and failing, really. There's no slow burn as Colin realizes that he actually wants her to use what she's learnt on him. There's this beautiful moment in Twelfth Night where Viola, who is disguised as a man, is secretly in love with Duke Orsino and confesses that she has felt strong love before. She speaks about a woman who never told her love, who sat like Patience on a monument, speaking directly to him but secretly speaking about herself and having to conceal her love for him. Now, I'm not asking Bridgerton to be Shakespeare, but it would have been nice to have Colin use these lessons as a way of actually flirting with Penelope under the guise of a lesson. Like Viola confesses her love in disguise, Colin could have been pretending to teach her how to flirt and then realizes that he's actually flirting with her. To have Colin confess his love behind a mask is exactly the kind of nervous move that the old Colin would have done. But alas, the lessons are completely abandoned after an episode and a half, and instead of being a plot device, it's just another throwaway couple of scenes. Penelope's arc suffers a lot from inconsistent writing. Her transition from a side character with a secretive and intriguing role to a main character has ended up underdeveloped, and despite her long-standing crush on Colin, their friends to lovers journey lacks any depth and build-up necessary to make their eventual relationship feel earned. I just didn't feel like their marriage or sex scenes were significant enough, and I think it's because they assume we already have the context of the first 2 seasons, so they decided not to spend any time building their story together, but that's exactly what we wanted. I needed to see why these two people work together, why they had to choose each other and no one else, and I was left feeling like Penelope and Colin both could have ended up in better relationships as someone else and have been in a happier situation. Also, the show's decision to rely on a makeover scene as a sudden shift on Colin's affection towards Penelope completely undermines the potential for a more profound exploration of their relationship. It just felt like he was motivated by looks and sex rather than anything deeper, and that was super disappointing for me. Overall, Bridgerton Season 3, despite its previous success, I feel like it fails to deliver the charm and coherence that drew us all in the first 2 seasons. Whilst I'm definitely intrigued by people like Francesca and Cressida and Benedict, the glaring issues and disjointed plot undermine the impact of the show. The once organic relationship between Penelope and Colin turns into this super strange, oddly paced, and ultimately forgettable plot that ends up with them just randomly fast-forwarding and having a baby at the end. Like, in all the other seasons, a pregnancy has been a huge deal, and it's built up over a few episodes, or even a whole season, but with this, they're just like, here's a baby, here's a child bride, and his baby, good luck. Ultimately, this season was a huge letdown, and I dare say that both Colin and Penelope were giving me the ick. I feel like with a romance show or a novel, you're supposed to feel like these people have found their soulmate, like they can't be with anybody else despite the hardships. And I think I would have felt that for the versions of Penelope and Colin that existed in the previous seasons, but these guys, I feel like I don't even know them. It really was a dud season, so that is my take. Let me know what you think in the comments. I have been your Uncle Herman, and thank you again to Aura for sponsoring this video. I will see you in the next one.